guys, so today we're going to look at exponential functions, and I think I'm going to go ahead and split this up into two parts again. One will be a fairly short part and then a little bit longer part, okay? I think also that I will have you go ahead and do some IXL practice, and that gives you that automatic feedback quickly, and so then you could let me know if you're having any questions with anything else, okay? But that's kind of the plan for right now. So let's go ahead and start and look at exponential functions. Okay, so an exponential function is in the form of, we have some kind of base, okay, to a power. Okay, so that x is up in the exponent place. Okay, so that is how we know it's an exponential function. We do want b to be greater than 0. Okay, not equal to 0. That'd be pretty boring. 0 to any power is 0. So, and also, we don't want b to equal 1 either. Okay, because 1 to any power is extremely boring because it's 1. So we want it to be greater than 0, but we do want it not to be equal to 1 either. Okay, so the first thing I want us to talk about is how to evaluate exponential functions. And so if you remember what evaluate actually means, okay, it just means plug a number in and find the value. Okay, so that means we will have some kind of problem like if y is equal to 5 to the x, okay, then what is y when x equals 3? Okay, so we would just go in and say y equals 5 to the third, which using our calculator or just our knowledge of powers, we know that that is 125. Okay, or maybe even more commonly, we would have something where we would have it in function notation, because exponentials are functions. So if we have f of x equals 3 to the x, okay, so what would f of negative 1 be? Okay, well that just means we plug in negative 1 for x. So we have 3 to the negative first, which yes, you can put in your calculator, but hopefully you remember that when you have a negative exponent, we just flip it. So this becomes 1/3. Okay. We could use that same problem and do f of about 0.2. Okay, it's perfectly fine to put decimals into an exponential. So 3 to the 0.2. Here I would want to use my calculator. Okay, so we get approximately about 1.2457. Now, to put in an exponential, you can use the caret key. You can use that y to the x button. If you're not sure on your calculator, email me and I'll try to help you out with that. Okay, so let's see. Your book on page 388, if you wanted to see a few examples, they have something like this: 5,000 to the, or times 2 to the negative 1.5. Okay, this is an exponential. It has an exponent, it has a base that's not 1, and it's bigger than 0. And then we just have something multiplied times it. So this is still exponential. They didn't put a y or anything, but to evaluate this, just put it in your calculator. Make sure you use the negative button when you put that 1.5 in. Okay. And we should get about 1,767.77, it looks like. Okay, so that's how we evaluate functions, okay, exponential functions. Now, what about this? E to the third, okay? Or, let's just say, let's change that to e to the x a minute. Is this an exponential? Okay, and the answer is yes. This has to do with the natural exponential function. Okay? And e is actually a number. Okay? Do any of you know it from a previous class? Okay. How about if we're not sure what it is? Okay, using your calculator, there are two places you can find e, okay, at least on a graphing calculator. So on the left-hand side, right next to the 4, you have a natural log button, and then it has an e to the x key. So I could take second e to the x, because I want to call it up, and take it to the first power, because remember the first power will tell us what something is. Okay, so I have e to the first, and it tells us that it is approximately 2.718. And then it keeps repeating 2.718281828. Okay, but usually we say about 2.718 or about 2.72. Okay, so that is what this number e is. Okay, so in this case, when we have e in mathematics, it does stand for a specific value, just like pi does. Okay, the second place that the e button shows up on your calculator is mine shows up over the divide key. Okay, this time it just has an e. It doesn't have a to the power. Okay, so if I just do second, divide, and push enter, it tells me that it's also 2.72. Okay, so that's two places you can find e. So let's do some evaluating with that. So what's e squared? Well, we just take e to the second, or you do e times e, either one of those, and it's about 7.389. Okay. Now, is that reasonable? I would say so, because 2, e is a little bit bigger than 2. Okay, so 2 squared is 4, and then 3 squared would be 9, so we know it has to be between 4 and 9. Okay. And what about e to negative 3/4? Okay. So we would take e to the negative 3/4, and we get approximately 4.724. Okay. So that is how we evaluate functions. Okay. Now, before we go to graphing in this next segment, I do want us to talk about how we can graph exponentials. Okay, so by hand. And then when we come back together in our second video, we're going to look at our graphs more closely on Desmos. Okay, but we're going to take a minute and look at it by hand. So let's say we want to look at the function y equals 2 to the x. Okay, that's a pretty basic exponential function. Okay. Do you remember what we do when we can't, or we don't remember what a graph looks like? We do a t-table. Okay, so we pick some numbers for x, and I'm just going to pick these. And we're going to plug them in. Okay, so 2 to the negative third. Okay, so 2 to the negative third means we flip it and take it to the third power. So it'd be like 1/2 to the third power, or it's 2 to the third and then flip it. But either way you do that, it's 1/8. Okay, and then 2 to the negative second is just 2 squared and you flip it. So you get 1/4. 2 to the negative first would be 1/2. What's anything to the 0 power? 1, so we get 0, 1. 2 to the first is 2, 2 squared is 4, and 2 cubed is 8. Okay, so by hand, if we need to, we will just plug in numbers here. Okay, and this is good practice for evaluating. So what if we had 1/2 to the x? And let's put those same things in. Okay. We can have exponentials that have power or bases less than 1, as long as they're still positive, which that is 1/2. Okay, so 1/2 to the negative third. Okay, so let's go ahead and flip 1/2 to 2, and then 2 cubed is 8. Okay, 1/2 flipped because of the negative is 2, and 2 squared is 4. 1/2 flipped because the negative 1 is 2, and 2 to the first is 2. What's anything to the 0 power? 1. Let's see, 1/2 to the first is 1/2, 1/2 squared is 1/4, and 1/2 to the third is 1/8. Okay, so that's how you would do it with this. Notice these are related, okay, and we will talk more about those in just a few minutes. Okay, so what you can do to practice, okay, before I give you your actual homework assignment, is in your book you could always look at page 388, okay, and if you would try 1 through 9 odd and check in the back of the book, that would get you started on evaluating, okay. I will give you an Excel assignment on Google Classroom, but that would give you a quick check, okay. I will be back with the second video in just a few minutes.